of the Diplomatic Corps, Professor Winston Moore, Deputy Principal of the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus, Dr. Halima Dishong, University Director, Institute for Gender and Development Studies, University of the West Indies, Dr. Nicole Charles, Associate Professor, Women, Gender and Sexuality Studies, Department of Historical Studies, University of Toronto, Mississauga, featured speaker. Dr. Tonya Haynes, Head and Lecturer, Institute for Gender and Development Studies, Nita Barrow Unit, featured speaker. Dr. Boris Krubasik, Chair of the Department of Historical Studies, University of Toronto, Mississauga. Featured visual artists, Lanor Aline, Simone Asia, and Anna Gibson. Deans, heads of departments, and members of the campus community, specially invited guests, members of the media, our distinguished audience, including those joining us online. I am Dr. Deborah Providence, and I lecture in Literatures in English at the Cave Hill campus. I am your chair for this very important and timely lecture and a discussion session on the topic, In the Flesh, Critical Reflections on Black Women's Experiences of Food, Embodiment, and Type 2 Diabetes. The lecture will be delivered by Dr. Haynes and Dr. Nicole Charles, and they will be joined by a group of brilliantly gifted Barbadian women artists with whom they collaborated to bring visual realization to their groundbreaking research. At this stage, I would like to invite Ms. Alicia Haynes, lecturer in the Institute of Gender and Development Studies, Nita Barrow Unit, to deliver the welcome remarks. Welcome, Ms. Haynes.
Chair, Dr. Deborah Providence, lecturer, Department of Language, Linguistics, and Literature, members of the Diplomatic Corps, Professor Winston Moore, Deputy Principal, the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus, Dr. Halima Dishong, University Director, Institute for Gender and Development Studies, the University of the West Indies, Dr. Nicole Charles, Associate Professor, Women, Gender and Institute for Gender and Development Studies, Nita Barrow Unit, featured speaker, Dr. Boris Krubasik, Chair of the Department of Historical Studies, University of Toronto, Mississauga, featured visual artists, Lanor Aline, Simone Aja, and Anna Gibson, deans, heads of departments, and members of the campus community, specially invited guests, members of the media, our distinguished audience, including those joining online, good evening. I am Alicia Haynes, lecturer at the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, Nita Barrow Unit. It is both an honor and a privilege to welcome you on behalf of the IGDS MBU as we gather this evening to critically engage with the intersections of gender, health, and the socio-political structures shaping Black women's lived experiences with type 2 diabetes. This evening's lecture, In the Flesh, Critical Reflections on Black Women's Experiences of Food, Embodiment, and Type 2 Diabetes, presented by Dr. Tonya Haynes and Dr. Nicole Charles, offers a nuanced exploration of the prevalence of type 2 diabetes in Barbados. Their research examines the intersections of shame, silence, and Black women's experiences of illness, underscoring the urgent need for clear, comprehensive health communication and high-quality instructive care. More broadly, their work highlights the entanglement of gender, health, care labor, and social justice exposing how Black women navigate healthcare in a neoliberal and neo-colonial context, shaped by the enduring legacies of empire, structural inequalities, and limited access to nutritious, affordable food. Their analysis foregrounds how the gender disparities in healthcare access, nutrition, and economic stability compound the challenges of managing chronic illness. Diabetes is not merely a clinical diagnosis. It is a condition embedded within the social, historical, and political fabric of Caribbean societies. This lecture emerges from a year-long feminist research project interrogating the structural determinants of health, including gender disparities in access to resources, the political economy of food consumption, and the disproportionate burden of care shouldered by women. By framing diabetes as a condition that is as much social as it is biological, Haynes and Charles foreground how Caribbean women navigate illness within a broader matrix of food insecurity, systemic inequalities, and neoliberal policies that exacerbate vulnerabilities. Haynes and Charles situate type 2 diabetes within a broader historical framework, one shaped by the extractive economies of the colonial sugar industry and its enduring effects on contemporary health disparities. As Amy Moran Thomas, author of Traveling with Sugar, reminds us, and I quote, "The word sugar already contains many journeys and histories," end quote. Sugar has not only been central to Caribbean economies, but has also shaped dietary patterns, bodily health, and the epidemiology of non-communicable diseases. In Barbados, where sugar was once a linchpin of economic production, diabetes functions as both a biomedical crisis and a haunting reminder of extractive colonial economies and persistent inequities. This discussion compels us to think critically about the material and effective legacies of sugar cultivation, not simply as a historical artifact, but as a structuring force in contemporary health inequities. Dr. Haynes and Dr. Charles challenge us to interrogate how historical injustices, economic constraints, and gendered expectations shape women's health outcomes. Their research has been shared not only within academic spaces, but also with the women who participated in the study through a closed workshop session, as well as with medical professionals at the Oscar Jordan Memorial Lecture on World Diabetes Day. These generate crucial intergenerational dialogues, repositioning women's health from the periphery of medical discourse to the center of socio-political critique and feminist transformation. As we gather this evening, we do so not only to listen, but to engage in collective reflection and praxis. At the IGDS MBU, our commitment to gender justice and transformative education and research remains steadfast. Dr. Haynes and Dr. Charles's work underscores the gender crisis of care in Barbados, where 1 in 5 adults is diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and among those over 65, the prevalence approaches 1 in 2. Notably, Caribbean women experience a 1.5 times greater risk of developing diabetes than men. These statistics reinforce the urgency of feminist research that interrogates these health disparities, gendered aging, and the broader socio-economic conditions shaping women's lives. Moreover, our graduate students at the IGDS MBU continue to produce critical scholarship on pressing issues such as state responses to sexual violence, Caribbean women's digital lives, the struggles of women farmers for citizenship, biphobia, gendered economic autonomy, and the lived realities of women with disabilities. Furthermore, Dr. Danielle Bob's research on unpaid care work, conducted in collaboration with the United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women, UN Women, Multi-Country Office Caribbean, critically examines the economic and social burdens of caregiving that render it invisible, particularly for women with disabilities. My own research, Shifting Gender Landscapes, Social Media Platforms, Caribbean Feminism, and Women's Digital Practice in Caribbean Publics, interrogates the shifting degrees of women's sociality on digital platforms and how these spaces mediate and reconstitute social material conditions alongside cultural identity signifiers through a conceptual lens of shifting multiple publics. Beyond research, our commitment to gender justice is exemplified in tangible initiatives. The Blooming Project, spearheaded by project coordinator Leanne Worrell, has provided mentorship and skill-building opportunities for young people at the government industrial schools since 2019, fostering community reintegration through training in a climate-smart agricultural and renewable energy. Our work in communities is sustained by key partners, including the Caribbean Development Bank, UN Women Multi-Country Office Caribbean, the Maria Holder Trust, and the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center. Additionally, our collaboration with the Barbados Water Authority has facilitated the Gender and Infrastructure Certificate delivered to 500 employees and partners. This year, we will continue this work by implementing training on unequal relations of gender, sexual harassment, and sexual and gender-based violence for the 3R Crew's Climate Resilience Waterways Systems in Barbados project, reaching over 300 employees. We are also partnering with the Bureau of Gender Affairs to deliver workshops for staff at all levels within the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs as part of the Transform project. Our long-standing Caribbean Institute in Gender and Development and intensive training program further exemplifies our commitment to sustained advocacy, public scholarship, and transformative education. All of these initiatives highlight our ongoing dedication to institutional transformation and gender justice. This evening, we also emphasize the significance of artistic practice in feminist discourse. We are pleased to feature key artists Lanor Aline, Simone Aja, and Anna Gibson in the moderated discussion. We recognize their creative interventions as integral to women's livelihoods and as critical engagement with the socio-political issues shaping contemporary Caribbean life as women navigate type 2 diabetes. This lecture, In the Flesh, Critical Reflections on Black Women's Experiences of Food, Embodiment, and type 2 diabetes, reaffirms the values that underpin our work at the IGDS MBU. Research that has impact, scholarship that fosters community transformation, and pedagogy that disrupts hegemonic norms. Awareness is the first step toward action. This evening, I invite you to enjoy the transformative insights to be shared. Welcome.
Thank you so much for those warm words of welcome and for setting the mood for us, Ms. Haynes. We now have a few remarks from Dr. Boris Krubasic, Chair of the Department of Historical Studies, University of Toronto, Mississauga.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? Thank you very much for inviting me to say a few words about the Department of Historical Studies, and it gives me great pleasure to be with you tonight at this public lecture. The Department of Historical Studies at the University of Toronto, Mississauga is a highly interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary department that gives home to many of its programs and students. Even though I'm presenting these notes to you virtually and from some distance to where you are, I wish I was there, as part of my greetings to you, I would very much like to situate ourselves at the land of the university and acknowledge the long tradition of the land with the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. The land on which the campus operates has been for thousands of years the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many indigenous people, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land and to use the name Mississauga in the name of our university campus. Within our department, we teach many undergraduate students in programs such as history, classical civilization, history of religions, diaspora and transnational studies, as well as women, gender, and sexuality studies. Some of these fields have been taught at European university, as you all know, since their very inceptions and have redefined themselves over generations, while others, such as diaspora studies, are newer fields, and some, such as women, gender, and sexuality studies, had to fight their way into existence and are enriching our ways of research and teaching to this day. What combines all of my colleagues in our programs is our deep commitment to critical inquiry. And that is both for research, regardless whether our research takes us into Sanskrit texts of the 8th century, the long-lasting impact of colonial borders that we can feel every day in the world, or whether we're examining queer identities in the Greater Toronto Area in our own time, as well as for teaching, where we are teaching students to read slowly, carefully, and critically, to question long-held truths and to cross-examine these facts until we are satisfied with the best available evidence at hand, and to formulate our inquiry into argument-driven research. The most valuable student learning is connected to research, new directions to ask questions that have in that form not been asked before. And this is the only way how we can contribute towards a society that bases its decisions on knowledge and evidence rather than on fear-mongering, hate, and bullying. For some of us, it may be new that mainstream politicians question the value of our work and the facts that we study. But it also must be acknowledged that in the long history of the 19th and 20th centuries, for many colleagues, and for colleagues working on women, gender, and sexuality in particular, the current situation is very vulnerable, but it is also much closer to how these colleagues' work has been treated for most of the last 100 years, and it deserves our full support. And here, Nicole's and Dr. Haynes' project is a brilliant example of the type of research our colleagues are doing and how it has the potential to transform how we as a community look at challenges, in this particular case, at type 2 diabetes. Investigating assumptions that are entrenched in the socio-political landscape and in economic and colonial legacies, and uncovering the lived experiences of women. Listening and giving these individuals a loud voice, a voice that once was, and perhaps sometimes still is, ignored. And that is critically important. It's important for any historical period in any place in the world, regardless whether this is about lived experiences 2,000 years ago and the preservation of cultural heritage, or closer to our own time. Yet, if it is about lived experiences in our own time, such as your project, in a manner that can make meaningful changes to the societies we live in, and maybe inform all of us about things we have ignored or misunderstood, its importance is felt particularly acutely. Thank you very much for your work, and I wish you all a very good evening.
Thank you. Okay, thank you to Dr. Krubasic for these words of encouragement and for underscoring the importance of this project. Joining us via UWITV from the IGDS headquarters is Dr. Halima Deshong, University Director of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Providence, Chair, and I recognize you, Chair and Lecturer in the Department of Language, Linguistics, and Literature, members of the Diplomatic Corps, Professor Winston Moore, Deputy Principal of the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill Campus, Dr. Nicole Charles, Associate Professor, Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at the Department of Historical Studies, University of Toronto, Mississauga, our featured speaker, one of two, Dr. Tanya Haynes, Head and Lecturer at the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, Nitabar Unit, our second featured speaker, Dr. Boris Krubasic, Chair of the Department of Historical Studies at the University of Toronto, Mississauga, featured artist, such a pleasure to welcome you back into the space, Lenore Aline, Simone Asia, Gibson, three of the finest, the world's finest. We're so happy to have you again. Deans, departments, and members of the campus community, all present, our specially invited guests. I saw in the audience Dr. Rosina Wilcher, who has been a friend of the Institute and a important force, Caribbean feminist, working to shift the inequalities globally. Members of the media, or distinguished audience present in person and online. Evening all. And I'm delighted, as I think you could tell, to offer remarks and greetings from the regional headquarters of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, especially given the role of this work for foregrounding the experiences of Black Barbadian women and the implications this research has for unlocking wider experiences in the Caribbean. Now, outside of a handful of researchers in disciplines across the humanities and social sciences, few have readily confronted Caribbean women's experiences and embodiment of non-communicable diseases in the wake of slavery and colonialism. I remember attending a lecture at the Cable campus delivered by Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, who at the time linked high rates of diabetes and hypertension to the violences of plantation slavery, only to be confronted by skepticism and remarks about how our relationship with these conditions are primarily about family history of these diseases, lifestyle, and dietary choices. Appreciating that we continue to live with histories out of which the Caribbean is formed and what we can learn from or with women who feel, manage, and live with type 2 diabetes hold great potential for informing the kinds of actions that state and health and social care entities must engage. I am particularly grateful for this opportunity to recognize the women whose stories, analyses, and knowledge about their own experiences with diabetes exist at the center of this powerful research. At the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, we engage in inter and transdisciplinary Caribbean feminist teaching and learning, research and outreach across a range of social, political, economic, and cultural phenomena in the region and in the wider world. We work with Caribbean governments, civil society organizations, private sector entities, regional governance bodies, and development agencies to conduct research, develop policies, action plans, teaching tools, and strategies with a view of addressing the material and ideological effects of gender inequality. These inequalities exist in healthcare, in education, the economy, and in our personal and social relations. They are deeply tied to Caribbean race and labor histories and continue to shape how we live, how we access, and how we experience formal healthcare. You heard a snapshot of the extensive work engaged by the Nita Barra unit of the IGDS when Alicia Haynes presented. And I should say that across all 4 entities of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, here at the Mona unit in Jamaica, the Regional Coordinating Office also in Jamaica, the St. Augustine unit in Trinidad and Tobago, and of course the Nita Barra unit in Barbados, we ask hard questions, not only to unsettle punitive power, but also because we insist in more expansive ways of being in the Caribbean. Dr. Tanya Haynes and Dr. Nicole Charles's research with women living with type 2 diabetes betrays in many ways a view from multiple and fresh vantage points, the kind of engagement for social transformation. Those are the kind of engagements we need for social transformation. The partnership between women, gender, and sexuality studies, and Department of Historical Studies at the University of Toronto, Mississauga, and the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, Nita Barra unit at the University of the West Indies, enacted through this joint research and community engagement led by Drs. Charles and Haynes, reflects, or I should say, is emblematic of our joint commitment to advancing socially transformative research through international collaboration. I wish to recognize the power of convening Barbadian, Caribbean women with whom you completed this research, alongside 3 of the Caribbean finest visual artists, Lenore, Simone, and Anna. We remain in awe of your Caribbean, Barbadian feminist brilliance, and we certainly welcome this opportunity to experience our world through your work, or the world as you see it through your artistic imaginary. And we look forward to engaging and hearing you later in the program. Permit me to celebrate and to congratulate two of the finest feminist thinkers, creators, and doers of all of any generation, Dr. Haynes and Dr. Charles. I worked with Dr. Haynes, and one of the things she is known for is a wonderful capacity to make connections across genre, space, place, and time. Dr. Charles, I have also come to know you through conversations and through your landmark works, and that the kinds of questions you ask, necessary questions, of course, about race, class, gender in healthcare and in history. Together, your collaboration will continue to make transformative research, to do this kind of necessary research that is so desperately needed in our Caribbean as we try to think past our continued systems of inequality, and as we look to the future with more fuller, happier, wider existences. Thank you so much. I look forward to the talk that you will give, and very best wishes for this continued work. Thank you all for being here.
Our sincerest thanks to Dr. Deschamps for those stirring words of encouragement and support. Well, now we have a special treat, a sweet treat, if I may, in the form of a cultural performance by the Tenantry. Sugar metaphors predominate in Caribbean literary and popular culture. Indeed, 16th and 17th century Western European, quote, amorous discourse and relations often borrowed references from sugar, establishing links between the erotic and sugar. Similar uses make up the majority of such references in Caribbean popular music, popular culture. Explicit references to diabetes are also found in Caribbean popular music, which is unsurprising given its prevalence. Shadow, for instance, we all know Shadow. 2014 song entitled Sugar describes men's experiences of type 2 diabetes. The particularities of women's experiences are yet to be articulated in soca and calypso, as far as we could tell. So this medley by the Tenantry is timely as it explores these sugar metaphors in Caribbean popular music. The Tenantry is Barbados' only all-women group. It's led by People's Choice Musician of the Year, Juanita Clark. This group boasts the vocals of Doronda Smith, Narisa Lynch, and the incomparable musicianship of Linnell Keynes and Shania Brathwaite. Let us all welcome the Tenantry. Don't drink this, don't drink that. And every minute you want to pee. Before you finish, you want to pee. You always hiding behind some tree. And then you hear the security. Don't be there, don't be there, don't be there, don't be there. Mind your sugar, shake your sugar. Yeah, 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 yeah. She was going down to 5 cents a pound, and they want me to put it down. But I love the taste all over my face. Even when I go into bed with this in sugar, boy, I must be fair. Oh, dear Deborah, give me the sugar. I don't care if it give me cancer. I don't care if it make me suffer. Oh, dear Deborah, give me the sugar. I don't care if it give me disease and care of diabetes. Oh, dear Deborah, give me the sugar. I don't care if it give me cancer. I don't care if it make me suffer. Oh, dear Deborah, give me the sugar. I don't care if you really love me. Put the sugar inside me coffee. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, you look sweet like sugar, but you walking that waistline, only raising my pressure, bringing that sugar wine. Your sweetness only calling me. Sing. Girl, you look sweet like sugar, but you walking that waistline, only raising my pressure, bringing that sugar wine. Your sweetness only calling me, only calling. No, you're done, you give me sugar rush, sugar rush. I never had this kind of feeling. Sugar rush, sugar rush. You get sugar at different meaning. No, you have me body aching, and you turn me a shaking. Sugar rush, sugar rush. I only hunt as your body calling me. Come on, girl, if you're working, calling me. I don't think I could last till morning. No, you have me body aching, and you do me a shaking. Sugar rush, sugar rush. This is our last song, guys, so feel free to get up and dance. We love this one. Just be mindful of the sugar you take. The sweetness I put inside a basket. I am the whole blinking market. And if you're looking for sexy to put inside a basket, I love the whole blinking market. I know y'all know this song, so I need to hear some voices. Pound for pound, jump every man down to the ground. Everything fresh, the market open. So if you're looking for sweetness to put inside a basket, I am the whole blinking market. And if you're looking for sexy to throw inside a basket, I am the whole blinking market. Sweet like a Julie mango and jam, stickiness running on my hand. They say such a sweet woman. They say such a nice woman. Cocoa in the sun, I have to get that up and a plum. They say such a sweet woman. They say such a nice woman. Whoa, juiciness, squeeze my only juiciness, bumper like an apple, fruitiness. Everything flash, look at the shelf. Everything done sell. If you're looking for sweetness to put inside a basket, I am the whole blinking market. And if you're looking for sexy to throw inside a basket, I am the whole blinking market. Woo! Thank you guys. Thanks for having us. Have a good evening. Can we have another round of applause for dulcet tones with a Caribbean flavor from the Tenantry? Thank you so much. Moving right along, and in the spirit of the lovely rendition we just experienced, it is my sincere honor to introduce the featured speakers for this special event. Dr. Nicole Charles is an Associate Professor of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at the Department of Historical Studies at the University of Toronto, Mississauga. Dr. Tonya Haynes is head and lecturer at the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, Nita Barrow Unit, University of the West Indies, Cave Hill. Together, they are currently exploring the politics of sugar, race, and diabetes in Barbados through an interdisciplinary project entitled Diabetes and the Afterlife of Slavery in Barbados: Art, Archive, and the Gender Dimensions of Risk. Please join with me in welcoming Dr. Charles and Dr. Tonya Haynes.
Good evening and welcome to everyone here. We are thrilled to have you joining us in person and online, and a special welcome and thank you to the women whose stories we would not have been able to complete this research without. We are so grateful for your time, and we hope we do you proud in sharing your stories tonight. So the PowerPoint when you're ready.
Yeah.
In the flesh, insert a test strip into the device. Poke a clean fingertip with the needle to get a drop of blood. 65-year-old Esther recounts pricking her finger every day with a glucometer to measure her blood sugar. Every day, every morning. When I get up, before I do anything else, I prick my finger to see what level it's at. And I take my blood pressure and I write it down. If during the night I got up more than once to do something, like to drink or to eat, I write that down. If I'm feeling out of sorts, like headache or whatever, I write that down on the page next to it. In the flesh, lesions, irritations, dark velvety patches on the skin, breaking out in sweat rashes, frequent bathroom trips day and night, itchy skin, tender, swollen skin. All that is part of being diabetic, said Darky Brights, a 59-year-old mother of 3 diagnosed with type 2 diabetes at age 40. Darky Brights recounts the ways her experiences of diabetes manifest in and on the flesh, and too, the often implicit overlapping of the mind and body in her navigation of these experiences. You see, around my ankles is tender and the skin feel like it's stretching. When I press, there's pain. What is the name for it? Neuropathy? Something like that. And this side of my leg is numb. Yeah. And it does feel sometimes like pins and needles. All that is part of being diabetic. You got to look after your feet. So I always check in and making sure that under my feet ain't numb and it got feeling. So that if anything stick me, because my grandson's scout leader just lost his foot. And he was a paramedic. Something took him under his foot, and by the time he realized it was a problem. And then he went to the clinic, and now he going to the clinic getting it dressed all the time. And he asked the nurse one day, how is it looking? She said everything looking good, and when he went and got up the Saturday morning, he couldn't put his foot down. He went to the hospital. They cut off probably like the big toe. In the flesh, as in infleshed, to give bodily form to concretize or make real the distress and fear many feel about amputation, kidney failure, dialysis treatment, and more. Fear that impedes some Barbadians from seeking care for wounds and other diabetic-related foot and limb complications. Infleshed fears that point yet again to the fundamental interconnection between body and self, and the oftentimes limited appreciation of the same in medical language and public health discourse.
Infleshed feelings of shame, anger, disbelief, surveillance, and despair further accompany many Black Barbadian women's experiences of type 2 diabetes, often overshadowed by public health portrayals of diabetes as a disease of excess consumption, sugar, enjoyment, gluttony, and healthiness. Indeed, it is not lost upon us that the biblical use of the phrase, in the flesh, similarly invokes acts and behaviors that seek to satisfy one's own desires, that are sinful. In this talk, we depart from such an understanding to emphasize the multiple and capacious ways in which type 2 diabetes is manifest in the flesh, in temporal, spatial, and embodied relations for Black Barbadian women. Women of color feminist theorists have long emphasized the significance of affect and embodiment, tracing the histories of these embodied emotions, and noting the ways they fuse together to create a politic born out of necessity, a theory in the flesh, guided by the physical realities of the lives of women of color, their skin color, the land or concrete they grew up on. Grounding the struggle for knowledge in the body, a theory in and of the flesh, embraces flesh as a guiding force, disrupting traditional Western epistemologies, public health, and biomedical languages around mind-body dualism, rationality, care, and more. Probing into these fleshy narratives offers a necessary complication of contemporary discourses and public health approaches to type 2 diabetes, many of which have done little to modify Black Barbadians women's food and drink consumption habits and lifestyles, yet hold persistent deleterious effects on their mental health, identity, and sense of self-worth and belonging. Such theories in the flesh, or languages of the self, as Claudia Garcia Rojas usefully describes them, speak to the lens through which many of the Black Barbadian women we interviewed view and experience living with diabetes. In the words of Sarah Ahmed, they are reorientation devices. They make possible modes of agency, joy, resilience, and survival amid multiple systems of oppression and power.
Through the fleshy, embodied, and intimate experiences of Black women living with type 2 diabetes in Barbados, the so-called amputation capital of the world, we underscore the political economy of food, health, and non-communicable disease, the impacts of diabetes on Black women's sense of self and identity, their relationship with food and sugar, and the gendered and racialized dimensions of the same. We highlight how women's stories and theories offer urgent critiques of how historically sedimented modes of power work on, through, and against Black women's bodies. And we argue for the ways in which care and women's experiences with diabetes ought to be understood at the intersection of chronic illness and historical structures of dispossession, including slavery, colonialism, neocolonialism, and the ongoing legacies of gendered and racialized oppression that ensue in their wake. Our ongoing multi-methods qualitative research project included 58 in-depth, semi-structured interviews with working class and middle class Black Barbadian women living with diabetes, Black women caring for patients with diabetes, and healthcare providers involved in providing diabetes-related care in Barbados, ranging from primary care physicians to specialist surgeons, nurses, and auxiliary professionals. It further includes the collection of a series of journal entries submitted by Black women living with diabetes. We conducted a series of archival research on digital newspaper archives on type 2 diabetes, its risk factors and associated keywords, and public health campaigns and advertising in Barbados. And we traced sugar metaphors and references to diabetes in Caribbean folk and popular music, some of which you heard performed by the tenantry this evening. Finally, we commissioned artwork from some incredibly talented Black Barbadian women artists with whom we will chat following this talk, and whose artistic representations depict women's embodied experiences navigating type 2 diabetes.
While preparing for this public lecture, I was also being screened for type 2 diabetes, given my family history. The GP instructed me on dietary and nutrition changes meant to result in weight loss. You need to get rid of some of that weight you're carrying around. He gave me a food guide for patients with type 2 diabetes produced by Novartis Pharmaceuticals, which categorized various foods by glycemic index, above which he had written in pen, yes, sometimes, no, no, over the original categorizations of low, medium, high, and very high. At the bottom, he included additional notes, such as no nuts, and he also crossed out some of the foods listed under the yes, low category. I immediately thought of my current eating habits, where I either skip breakfast entirely to get ahead of a busy and stressful workday, or bought breakfast from the staff canteen, where most of the options are fried and sweetened. At lunch, I typically have white rice, which was now in the no category. Alongside the meanings attached to food by pharmaceutical companies and general practitioners treating patients in Barbados, where 1 in 5 Barbadians has a type 2 diabetes diagnosis, and women have 1.5 times the risk as men, we explore the multiple, overlapping, and contradictory meanings women map onto food. As Wen Ying Shu notes, food is the most significant medium of traffic between the inside and outside of our bodies. Examining the semantic, affective, representational, moral, and political thickness of food and sugar is central to understanding women's experiences of type 2 diabetes. It serves as a means of connecting the historical and current food and nutrition insecurity of the Caribbean to women's gendered experiences of the political economy of food and sugar, the moral economies in which these circulate, and the relationships they map between food, health, and their bodies. Understanding food and sugar as processes is to say that they are created and recreated through mundane activities of cooking, talk, and prayer. Following this creation and recreation, this undoing and reassembling of the thickness of food and sugar allows for an examination of taste, desire, and sociality in analyzing health outcomes for women. Many of the women we interviewed were concerned about the cost of food in Barbados and linked this to their inability to follow dietary and nutrition advice for managing type 2 diabetes. Chosen is a 54-year-old clerk diagnosed with type 2 diabetes in 2021 who describes her socioeconomic status as comfortable. She linked the inability to afford healthful food to the government's own inability to control food prices. In terms of food stuff, it would be nice if people could really afford to buy the healthy stuff that they would need. But I know that's another challenge for the government as well. 50-year-old Kaikobi, diagnosed about 20 years ago, is a self-employed farmer who described herself as middle income, while noting that Barbados doesn't really have a middle class anymore. She was critical of flippant advice that Barbadians should just grow their own food as a purportedly meaningful way to address nutrition insecurity. We don't have all the answers, and I don't know that government has all the answers. But I think it starts at making food economically accessible. It has to be in the economics. You can't tell somebody, oh, go and plant up the garden. How are they going to buy the seeds? How are they going to buy the things to spray? How are they going to cope with the water embargo in the dry season? So I plant a little cucumber and thing, but I can't wet because water authorities say we have a scarcity of water. I mean, I don't mean to be pessimistic, but I think there's a certain amount of reality that we have to deal with. Interviewees therefore sought creative ways to compensate for their inability to completely eliminate some foods, which provided the majority of calories for them and their families. Darky Bright's notes, I suppose the best advice would be to come off of rice and them things, which is good advice. But it's not as simple as that when you're making X amount of money and you got to cook for other people. So what I do is small amounts. I wouldn't sit down and eat a big plate of rice.
Alongside ideologies of personal responsibility for health, women advanced a much broader collective responsibility that was attuned to global disparities in pharmaceutical access, one that highlighted the role of the state in securing the health of the nation. Rebecca has lived with type 2 diabetes for 20 years and is a 65-year-old woman who described herself as an underemployed little poor girl. I have to ask the question, are we really serious about diabetes? That is what makes me participate in this kind of thing. You would hear the politicians saying they're going to do this for NCDs and they're going to do the next thing for NCDs, but do they really? They just talk about it, get in Parliament, and give you a lot of pretty talk. I understand we're in a global thing now where medication is difficult to get and the kind of medication you want given. But I'm saying that if you looked after our food, our health would improve. Food, therefore, emerges as a significant stressor for women living with type 2 diabetes and is part of the chronic strain of living with the condition. So chronic strain here is a term that our colleague Amy Moran Thomas uses to describe the cumulative mental, emotional, and physical toll that diabetes takes on the body. So the fatigue, the fear, the worry, and these are themes that are repeated throughout Barbadian women's stories, and which exist alongside the physical deterioration of the body, so the failing organs, the loss of limbs, and so on. Women narrated such chronic strain and stress of not knowing what to eat, constantly thinking of what to eat, or needing to eat frequently as part of living with diabetes. They wrote in their diaries about feeling that they let down their families when they did the right thing in terms of their own diet and preparing specialized meals. Personally, I feel like when I do the right thing regarding diabetes, it is at the expense of doing things for the family. 60-year-old Deej wrote in her body diary. Many women reported cooking multiple pots of foods for their families in order to compensate for this. So one containing their specialized meals, often perceived as bland and departing from cultural tastes, and one that would suit the tastes of the rest of the family. And this complex navigation of personal health and the gendered responsibility for familial health, nutrition, and food preparation involves a great deal of time and energy. That is to say, not only are many women shopping for and cooking multiple meals a week or even a day, but they are investing a significant amount of time and energy into filling information gaps about food and nutrition for themselves, gaps that they shared wishing their doctors or healthcare team would have provided them at the outset of their diagnosis. Esther writes in her diary, "I wish for someone to guide me on foods to cook. I keep looking online and end up spending money stupid." Many lamented the difficulty parsing the misinformation found online, the decontextualized lists of so-called good foods and bad foods, the prevalence of imported and therefore expensive foods in recommendations from online sources and dietitians they consulted locally, and the marketing of products and services disguised as nutrition information. Ursula welcomed Caribbean initiatives like octagonal warning labels as potential sources of nutritional information, which would complement her ongoing education by her dietitian. Yeah, Octagonal warning labels would be helpful because it's good to know what it is you're putting in your body. Because right now, with the same dietitian, she's showing me about the calories. I still ain't get the hang of it, but she'll be trying to show me my calorie intake, how to look for what has enough sodium and what's not. 47-year-old Ursula, who was unemployed and on welfare at the time of this interview, expressed that even after more than 20 years since her diagnosis, decision-making about food, diet, and nutrition still remained confusing. You got to learn to eat fruits, your vegetables, your fiber, this, that, and the third. But when you're consuming the fruits now, you're finding that certain fruits got in too much sugar, and that does carry up your sugar levels. So sometimes for me, being diagnosed with that for over 20-something years, I still confused with it. These narratives serve to complicate individualized notions of non-compliance, calling attention to Barbados's reliance on imported and ultra-processed food, which makes it unaffordable for many. They further call attention to women's need for ongoing nutrition education and the ways that following restrictive, expensive diets are often at odds with their fulfillment of gendered caregiving responsibilities.
For some interviewees and in dominant public health messaging, diabetes is understood to have a single cause, which is not only under individual control, but is linked to a morality around gluttony, excess, fat, and poor choices. In a similar vein, while atypical, Rosie's use of the term clean in relation to not having diabetes is instructive of both the moral meanings attached to type 2 diabetes, as well as the sense that it is one's individual behaviors and decisions which are its cause. Rosie, a 64-year-old worker in the security services who works 2 jobs, was diagnosed in 2005. She blames herself for her diagnosis. I didn't born with it, so I had no right with it. It is of my own accord that I get it, you know? I born a clean person. If it was type 1, I would say, okay, I born with it. But you don't born with type 2 diabetes. How I get type 2 diabetes? Our analysis reveals the dense morality in which food and sugar are embedded. For many of the women we interviewed, food and sugar were bound up in experiences of punishment and morality, which reinforce hierarchies of gender, class, and age. 54-year-old Fidelia recalled an instance from childhood where she was playing and missed out on the food when it was being shared, as teaching her a larger lesson about life. It kind of like did something to my mind as well, that you can't depend not even on your family members to left food for you. So secure your food before you go. Esther shared a story with us in which food, sugar, and her relationship with her mother are all central. A boiling sugar cake dropped on her hand is used to teach her a lesson about stealing. Esther is very clear about the cruelty of the act, as well as the morality in which it is embedded, as a strict hierarchy exists between children and adults reserve the right to use harsh physical discipline. My mom, she used to do sugar cakes. I told you everything was sweet. So she would drop the sugar cakes on the table. And I remember I really wanted a sugar cake, but they weren't finished. So when the wet one went down, she wasn't looking, so I reached my hand, and she dropped it on my hand. And it scorched, and it burned, and everybody was like horrified. And she said, well, she will never steal again. In addition to experiences of punishment around food and sugar, women intimated the ways gendered forms of violence were bound up in their diabetes journeys. While we did not ask women about sexual and gendered violence, neither directly nor indirectly, given the pervasiveness of such violence in in the lives of women, girls, and gender-expansive people, it was impossible for such stories not to surface. As such, their narratives also implicate gendered violence in diabetes management and care. Queen Cat is a 53-year-old Barbadian woman. A clerical worker who lives alone, she described her socioeconomic status as not good at all. Diagnosed with polycystic ovary syndrome at age 42, she was told by the doctor at the time to look out for diabetes. It's going to come. She was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes 2 years prior to the interview. She explains that even though she's not an alcohol person, she started to consume alcohol in order to build up her tolerance after having been drugged and sexually assaulted. I was never an alcohol person, but it's only a few years ago I started to drink just so I can control myself, because there was a case where I felt like, so I can handle them now. I just drink to handle it. If I have to drink 2 beers with somebody, that my head wouldn't go mad and I wouldn't have to wake up with somebody on top of me again, because that's what they try to do. So that's it. But I'm not an alcohol person. Queen Kat's narrative of needing to consume alcohol despite such consumption, compromising diabetes management, and against the fact that she doesn't even like alcohol, in response to sexual violence, demands that we examine more closely the place of unequal relations of gender in the narratives of women's experiences of type 2 diabetes, and that we center the sociality of food, sugar, and alcohol in our analysis.
Food, of course, is embedded in a thick gendered sociality. Cooking and domestic skills are markers of womanhood in which interviewees expressed pride. Food holds very strong memories that shape taste, experience, relationships, and values across the life course. Important social and family occasions are marked by sharing of food. Certain foods are reserved for special occasions such as Christmas or special days of the week like Sunday. Foods themselves are also coded by class, ethnicity, and gender, with a preference for certain foods understood as reflecting a lack of refinement. Or as Goldie put it, my mom used to say if we were slaves, me and my grandmother would always be out in the field. We would never have made it into the house because we didn't like more refined things. We were definitely ground provision type people. Preparation of food and confectionery for sale, catering, food vending, and home-based shopkeeping are modes of income generation which interviewees reported as significant for their female kin and shaping their taste for sugar during childhood. Interviewees told stories of food serving as an expression of love and care for both the recipient and the giver. For Rowles, a 63-year-old merchandiser who has been living with type 2 diabetes for over 20 years, one of her strongest food memories from over 50 years ago is of her neighbor giving her family all of their Sunday food, to the displeasure of her own family who had to go without, and the enduring closeness which resulted from this act of generosity. I remember on Sunday, I don't think we had anything to eat, and a neighbor gave us all of her food. Every bit of food. Even their family didn't have none. And I always remember that all the time, because we was poor. I never taste food since then that tastes so nice. Against claims of women's social self-limitation in the literature on gender and diabetes, we highlight how women navigate cultural norms around food and alcohol to maintain friendship and kinship networks after their diagnosis. For Quintek, participation in family gatherings means preparing her own meal and taking it with her. I don't go at anybody and eat everything either. As I'm talking to you, we are going to be having a family gathering on Sunday and I carrying something for me to eat. My family is not diabetic and they could eat everything.
Esther describes losing some friends and making the decision not to go out because of the pressure to drink socially and the lack of understanding of type 2 diabetes by those who do not share the diagnosis. I would drink a glass of wine or 2 beers or something with my friends. And what I found started to happen was that people expected me to be the same. And I would say, oh, no, just one. And although I said no drinks, drinks are still flowing. So I had to stop going out because people didn't understand. And if I did go out, I had to change how I drank. And I had to change some of the friends I had. Because if you're pushing me to do something I don't want to do, and you're still insisting, then I know you don't care about me. because you're trying to get me killed by helping me kill myself. So I literally had to drop some of my friends. Elsewhere, we have argued that stigma and shame result in a paradoxical silence around type 2 diabetes, which fuels ignorance and misinformation. Here, a lack of understanding by relatives and friends means women have to employ creative means in order to maintain their participation in social and familial networks, or risk losing them altogether. We demonstrate that food is a stressor for women living with type 2 diabetes, not just in terms of cost, but also in terms of the ongoing need for nutritional information to guide their decision-making. Like the sensation Chosen gets in her feet when she consumes too much sugar, or the sores which erupted on the skin of Agnes and Fidelia in their childhood, which they attributed to high consumption of refined cane sugar. These tensions also play out on and against women's very bodies. The body is the site through which we know and experience the world. For the women we interviewed, navigating type 2 diabetes was thus significantly an experience of navigating their relationships to their body. Take, for instance, how 53-year-old Lizzie described her body as a wreck from diabetes, or how 63-year-old Archangel relays that diabetes made her ashamed of her body. When asked how diabetes impacts her day-to-day, 47-year-old Dorothea defeatedly shared, "My body is tired." Across our interviews, women recounted tales of their diabetic bodies as feeling old, maternal, tired, and frail. They described swollen feet, darkened feet, being fat and flabby, frequent urination and bedwetting, difficulty sleeping, itching vulvas and vaginas, with many invoking lower limb amputations as the nadir of abjection, a cautionary tale. For such women, a crucial part of their diabetes journey was coming to terms with their changing bodies and making a decision to care for themselves, especially in light of said fears of worsening outcomes due to aging and uncontrolled diabetes.
In addition to navigating relationships to their changing bodies, shame and betrayal repeatedly surfaced as embodied experiences that women struggle to hold through their journeys with diabetes. Amma is a 60-year-old healthcare worker and mother of two who has been living with diabetes for more than 2 decades. When asked whether she spoke to anyone about her diabetes upon diagnosis, she disclosed, "No, please. No, because I felt that if I say something, I would feel badly that I wasn't eating properly or I didn't follow up on all the health guidelines that you hear all over the media. And I really didn't want to be named as a person with diabetes because it would say, you eat a lot of sweets, knowing that I like ice cream. So, that's how I felt people would say she was eating too much sweets and she was not healthy. So for that reason, I would have been ashamed to be named as a diabetic. And then I heard about toes being, dismembered. And, when I saw persons with amputations, and then if you don't get your check, you could catch gangrene in your feet and your toe. It starts with 1 toe, then it's 2, then it's part of the feet, So that scared me, and I didn't want to let anyone know. Likewise, Deej, a mother of 2 employed in the public service sector, spoke of experiences of shame, specifically in relationship to the sense of betrayal she felt about her body. On a very personal note, sometimes I feel betrayed by my body. It seems like when you finally have one thing under control, you have to deal with something else. I really hate yeast infections, all types, especially the genital. It's like a constant fight. The bra line, armpits, behind the knees, even on the arms keep me vigilant. The heat is not helping, and I essentially live with fans or AC wherever possible. I wear clothes that are as loose as possible while still being presentable in public spaces. Lady Angel similarly expresses shame about her appearance and the ways in which she is often verbally shamed by family and friends as a diabetic. Honestly, I'm tired of looking at my body, especially my stomach. I hate the way I look. I can't find anything to fit me. I hate being thirsty all the time, the negative comments from family, friends, and relationships. As noted earlier, that managing diabetes is often seen by women to be about bland food and self-denial, results for many in a form of self-surveillance and punishing of the body in order to establish oneself as a good, moral, disciplined person, i.e. one that does not have diabetes. Self-blame and stigma and gendered individual responsibility for health, which, as we noted, extends to gendered responsibility for family health, are all bound up in relationship to one's value. Consider 53-year-old Goldie, who self-describes as middle class and who had received her diagnosis the previous year. Goldie asserts that she feels let down by her body because she eats healthily, exercises 4 times a week, and is not as fat as other Bajans who do not have type 2 diabetes. I feel a little bit let down because I don't have a clear, at least to me, I don't have a clear answer as to why I'm diabetic. I don't, like I said, I don't eat a lot of sweets, that type of thing. I eat, primarily fresh foods and that type of thing. So I think when I hear somebody is diabetic, I want to hear that that person eats a lot of junk. And, they buying snow cones every day and they eat, and they drink in 3 sweet drinks and that type of thing. And then there are persons that I know that are certainly a lot fatter than I am. And, I can see them eating and drinking what we would consider to be quite unhealthy, and they're not diabetic.
By Goldie's reasoning, the moral logic of diabetes suggests that the junk food eating, snow cone drinking Barbadians who are quote unquote a lot fatter than she is deserve the diagnosis, but she does not. Goldie's words reductionistically render diabetes as a just outcome for those of us who are fat and whose eating habits are deemed both excessive and unhealthy. Such a portrayal and understanding of diabetes is perpetuated within public health messaging about the disease across Barbados. Other women's stories further illustrate the way in which societal and lay beliefs about weight and diabetes are reinforced through an oftentimes reductionist medical focus on obesity and weight loss. For women like Deej, such a focus not only induced in her a sense of shame and stigma, but came at the expense of her truly appreciating the potential complications and severity of the disease if left unmanaged, while also impacting her mental health and relationship to her body. Initially, Deej felt that her physician's singular advice around weight loss suggested that a pre-diabetes diagnosis wasn't all that serious. Ultimately, she notes, it was ineffective in changing many of her eating habits, especially as it related to sweets and candy, something she shared struggling to control as she grappled with patterns of hoarding and binging food since childhood. I found that I would go along really well for 5 to 6 weeks, and then I had this phenomenon where I would find myself in the parking lot of a supermarket, having gone in and bought peanut M&Ms, and I'm sitting in the car and I would get through half the pack and I'd be like, what am I doing? It's almost as if I was blacked out going in to get it, right? So again, I have a problem, but I hide it very well. And again, because of the focus on weight loss, so long as I'm losing a few pounds and stuff. Deej suggests here that so long as she was consistently losing weight, her doctor would be satisfied. But the problem of hoarding and binging that she identifies remains and is potentially amplified through this added layer of medical surveillance around weight. It is noteworthy that in none of our interviews with medical professionals did the topic of malnutrition, body dysmorphia, or disordered eating among diabetes patients emerge. One senior medical professional we interviewed went as far as to suggest that diabetes is not stigmatized at all, and that perhaps what women are experiencing is a form of self-imposed stigmatization, which leads them to hide their condition. This limited recognition of and appreciation for the embodied intersections between shame, mental health, body image, and diabetes in our data set strikes us as a significant oversight in and opportunity for enhanced care for Barbadian women. That embodiment often exceeds the limits of language is arguably evident through this apparent difficulty that many doctors and healthcare workers we interviewed seem to face in appreciating the full spectrum of women's lived realities with type 2 diabetes in a social, economic, and cultural context, such as Barbados. Here, it is useful to turn to what feminist disability studies scholar Margaret Price calls the body-mind, the explicit and often implicit overlapping of mind and body. Theorizing this concept, Black feminist theorist Sami Schalk invites us to release our investments in mind-body dualism to better understand the relationship of non-physical experiences of oppression, psychic stress, and overall well-being for people of color and their decision-making about what constitutes well-being in the entangled realms of healthcare and biomedicine.
Over the course of hour-long interviews with Black Barbadian women, they worked to flesh out these intricate connections and give voice to the intensely visceral features of shame, the way it is held in their body minds, and the ways they intersect with embodied feelings of fear, doubt, and worry, all emotions that accumulate around an understanding of the self as wrong, failed, bad, non-compliant with social norms, not vigilant enough. Their stories illustrate how, for some, embodied shame and betrayal led to ripple effects such as isolation, depression, and sometimes the avoidance of intimate relationships. For instance, some participants reported rejecting or avoiding romantic relationships in order to circumvent any conflict that might arise due to their diabetes. For example, feeling tired, not wanting to engage in gendered social reproduction, like cooking for a partner, sexual activity, participating in social activities, or taking on additional caretaking responsibilities. 63-year-old Quintex shared, "You must understand why I say I'm not running about myself. I don't want anybody in my life now to come and say they love me. And when they say they love me and they sleep by my house tonight, tomorrow morning they get and gone, and then I don't see them. And I worry. So let me stay here by myself." Dorothea adds, "I'm single. Like, I guess if you're with somebody and you're constantly tired all the time, your boyfriend, your girlfriend might get vexed with you. But thankfully, I don't have that problem. 99 problems, and a man ain't one of them." While many of the women we interviewed were partnered and described their family as being their main source of support with diabetes amid the overwhelming load of caretaking they continued to bear as women in the household, some did express their partners as insufficient sources of emotional support as they navigated the social and emotional toll of diabetes, sometimes even from the very start, dismissing the traumatization they felt upon diagnosis with suggestions that you ain't get no death sentence, or it was only a matter of time. And yet, amid it all, women overwhelmingly refused to express defeat at this lack of social support. Instead, they shared the ways they channeled their energy into taking better care of themselves by cooking differently, offering themselves as cautionary tales, and educating their friends and families about diabetes, even as they simultaneously sought better care and education from their own doctors and the government. Some noted turning to faith as a coping mechanism, giving it all to God, and know this too shall pass and everything will be sorted, and living in hope that there will be a day when my body, it won't be this body, so I won't have to worry about diabetes. I could eat all the mangoes I like and not have to worry about no blood sugar. In closing, we turn to the visual realm that depicts this range of embodied experiences that women with type 2 diabetes face and which often exceed language. Analyzing the work of the 3 artists we worked with throughout this project, we note how Black female embodiment and shame are reconfigured. Through the supportive touch of the figure in Lenore Aline's Tea and Empathy, the strong posture and stature embodied by the figure in Simone Asia's Encumbered while wading through the sticky molasses, and the confident aura and disposition held by the woman in Ada Gibson's Head of the Table, while being seemingly entangled and constrained. These works simultaneously gesture to the underbelly of shame and the otherwise possibilities that might exist for Black Barbadian women in absence of the narratives and dictates that continuously impose feelings of shame, failure, and defeat upon Black women's bodies. They call attention to the ways women work, often unnoticeably, to reclaim their identities and feel good in their bodies, outside the realm of diabetes care and lifestyle interventions like dieting and exercise. Like Goldie, who told us, "I'm fastidious about getting my nails done." And Genevieve, who finds great joy in playing Wordle and watching old TV shows like The Nanny and Golden Girls, just because they make her laugh.
Food is conspicuously, deliberately absent from these artworks. Medicinal plants, flowers, and bitter cane are the central motifs in Simone Asia's and Lenore Aline's work. In Anna Gibson's Head of the Table, the woman irreverently takes her rightful place, with a homemade kite obscuring most of the dinner plate. Though entangled by its tail, she is surrounded by expansive blue skies. I love living, and I want to live to be 104, 64-year-old Lucy Lockett asserts. I know I is a fighter, and I want to see these people get better. I already get an amputation. I done been through it all, 35-year-old Marissa affirms. In the flesh, women's defiant joy, their generous willingness to offer their stories, time, and labor for collective change, still here, still fighting, and dreaming of white futures. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Dr. Haynes and Dr. Charles. We can show them a bit more appreciation. So at this point in the program, I would like to invite to the stage the featured artists, Lenore Aline, Simone Asia, and Anna Gibson, to join us in the chairs here. Oh, and I'm told that Lenore is joining us via UWITV. Hi, Lenore.
Hello.
Okay, so this is my second hat, which is to chair this portion of tonight's events. Welcome again to everyone. Thank you so much to Dr. Charles and Dr. Haynes. I want to start by asking the artists to illuminate for us a bit about their experiences, collaborating with the two gifted lecturers we just heard here, what that process was like for you. And I have follow-up questions, but I'll start with that for now. We'll start with Lenore.
Rainy, but I'm happy to be able to do it. Can you guys hear me?
You could go ahead. We're hearing you.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. I'm joining you guys from North Carolina, Charlotte. To just dive right in, my day job is a marketing director. So part of the joy of working with Dr. Haynes and Dr. Charles was the collaborative experience of just talking through what the project is and then going off and doing my own research in collaboration with their research and then creating a piece around that using my artistic vocabulary, which is collage and mixed media. I could go a little bit further into that, but I don't want to take up too much time going through that. But it was a wonderful experience and something that I do regularly in my career. And so it was a real pleasure and a real joy to work with them on this.
Nor, direct the same question to you, Simone.
Hello. Perfect. We'll be sharing one mic tonight. My name is Simone Asia. I'm an artist here in Barbados. I am basically very fond of illustration. I tend to do a lot of pen and ink work, but recently delved a bit more into mixed media. But my main thing is illustration drawing. Working with Dr. Haynes and Dr. Charles and the other fellow artists was a great experience for me. As an artist, I tend to journal a lot naturally. So I found the process in terms of the research and the data to be quite interesting because that does reflect kind of what I do as well. So even in terms of like the scientific data and understanding diabetes a bit more, I do have that somewhat in my family. So it was really interesting to kind of read through the journals, read through the data, and collect as much information, you know, for the project, but also for myself. So I almost became more aware seeing your research as well. That's it.
Thank you, Simone. And now, Ms. Gibson.
Hi, good night, everyone. I'm Anna, and I've been an artist. I've been practicing for over 7 years. And my work mostly looks at women's bodies, and I explore insecurities and kind of how we are perceived in society and how we seek to change and shift according to it. So I felt like this work, including me in this study, was like the perfect puzzle piece, and it will definitely impact me to come. And I really loved getting to delve into all these different people's perspectives and how intimate it was. I felt like that made the information sit with me even more and resonate. So I think I really love your presentation and how they share the experiences within the information, so it really stays with you.
Okay, thank you to our brilliant artists. In being a part of the audience and listening and looking at the artistic pieces, questions of food insecurity and food deserts came up for me as I was listening to the presentation. So I was wondering if there is a way that those challenges are addressed at all when prescriptions are being given, when healthcare is being provided, from the interviews that you conducted. What were the interviewees' experience of phenomena such as food insecurity and other challenges related?
You want me to go? No, go.
So we are also wondering, but because something that we did not hear a lot about, I think we mentioned at one population, which is really veterans now retired doctors and surgeons we spoke with told us stories of a term used to describe two patients to a bed in hospitals. And when was it, Tanya? 50s? Because there were such urgent health crises. And, with food insecurity, Barbados, 87% of food in Barbados is imported. The Caribbean in general is increasingly food insecure. And so we thought that it was very striking that, and you can look at, you can't see it now, but on this slide that Tanya showed with the Novartis pharmaceutical food recommendations of what to eat and what not to eat, and what many of the women explained their doctors told them to eat or their dietitians, are not foods that are local to Barbados, are foods that are imported, are foods that are exorbitant in price, foods like berries. And so, we thought that there was a big disjuncture here, of course, between what is recommended to eat. And oftentimes there were not very many recommendations of what to eat, just what not to eat. And so that is not addressing food insecurity. That's not addressing the cost of food, as Tanya shared in the part of the presentation that she read. The recommendation to plant your food is really not feasible for several reasons. And so this was a huge gap that we identified in terms of care. We note that doctors in general do not receive a large amount of nutrition training, and so this burden is falling on dietitians. And many of the women we interviewed did not actually work with dietitians, or if they did, they found that the advice was really difficult to follow, or they were able to follow when under the care of a dietitian, and once they were no longer seeing the dietitian, they just fell off the wagon, they would say, right? Because it was just so, it's not feasible, it's not connected to the realities of their lives, their financial circumstances, their gender responsibility for familial health, and so on.
And on this question, I'd really just like to say that things like nutrition insecurity in the Caribbean are engineered and structural and historic. This reliance and over-reliance on importing food, it is not something that's new. And it plays out in women's lives in very interesting ways. So some of the women we interviewed would say things like, if I had more disposable income, I would buy more vegetables. Or I recall one interviewee who said, my mother is in the U.S. and when I travel to visit her, I use that, I take advantage of that opportunity. And so I buy things like Brussels sprouts and like vegetable and fruit and food as these kinds of indulgences when, food is your health and food is a human right. But food commodities to describe our nation might suggest that they were middle class. We're also reporting difficulties with removing things like getting the majority of your calories from white rice, for example.
One more thing I think to add here is the fixation and focus on obesity within many of the narratives around diabetes and within public health education, and the focus on sugar. And to your point on food insecurity, I think there's often this assumption, and this is not just by public health discourse, I think it's within society, as you saw in the women's narratives, that if you have diabetes, you are living in a life of excess and gluttony and pleasure and enjoyment and over. And I think it's really important for us to recognize the ways in which many of the women are struggling with eating in general. And that's something that's a big gap in analysis and something for us as researchers, public health practitioners, doctors, nutritionists to probe into further.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your answers. I have a question. I'm thinking more. I would or elaborate on that idea a little bit more, because I relate a lot to this, the experience of stealing the sugar cane, stealing the sugar cake, piece of a sugar cake when, mommy is not looking. So I was just wondering if there's a way we could say a little bit more about this idea of the dense morality associated with eating and the sometimes punitive approach to eating that we adopt.
Okay, so I'll go back to one of the first presentations that Nicole and I did was called Sugar Stories. And it was because so many of the interviewees would recount, especially from childhood, these stories where sugar was very, very central and like sweet treats. And so many women talked about these skin eruptions that they got in childhood that were the result of consuming excess sugar. And so it was tracing those constant recurring narratives across the stories of these women about this centrality of sugar. And also for a lot of them, a lot of food insecurity in childhood or poverty in early childhood. And so food becomes very central, and food as something that is gendered in all the obvious ways that we might think about, in the fact that, women are responsible for its preparation, for managing that part of the family, for the cooking, for the health and nutrition of the entire family, including adult children. So I think part of that morality around thinking about food is about who has to steal some, try to claim a little bit more for themselves as their children, the way in which you might have to compete, or that you would be punished for wasting food because of these broader experiences in Barbados's history of, poverty in childhood. So something like wasting food or refusing food, or the idea that you could like or not like something. So sometimes when we ask women about like taste and what they liked and what they had to eat in childhood, women would say, "Oh, you ate what they gave you. Like either you ate it or you did not eat." And so part of that, thinking about food as embedded in that morality and also in that dense sociality, is about how so many of our everyday but also important occasions are marked by food and, by sharing. So lots of stories around what particular foods meant that you could only, for example, get at Christmas, or that sometimes Christmas would be the only time that you could get an entire apple for yourself, or the only time that you would get certain things like the Martineau sweet drink. You have to be a certain age to be familiar with so things like this that women would share. And then the way in which things have changed, so that some of these things are now daily, readily available that before were imbued with a certain kind of meaning. And so it becomes hard to abandon certain things because they are wrapped in these very dense emotional connections. Nicole, maybe you can give a little bit more of a coherent answer about that. But just to say that food is everyday and mundane, but it carries so much meaning, including the meanings that medical professionals and dietitians map onto food. Women themselves, we have our own meanings.
All right, thank you, Dr. Haynes. And I promise this is the last question before we... Okay. I can, yes, most certainly. I guess because I'm also a dabbler in the art, the visual art myself, I am extremely aware of how personal time and space is crucial to the creative process. And I wanted to hear from you if you have, and recently every year there's the artist studio tours. And we get a glimpse into the way artists curate their space or their creativity. So I just wanted to hear from you, I promise, how do you enter into a space where you can do this type of creation, where this type of illustration, and if you have a favorite media that you gravitate to.
Hello again. It's interesting with space because a lot of times with artists in Barbados, space is sometimes always a bit of a challenge. So it's more about will. When you're an artist, it's about will. It's either you're going to do it or you're not going to do it. I've had challenges recently with this project, and that was more personal, but I had to push through it because I had to give myself personal deadlines, personal goals to get it done within that time. So like navigating as an artist in the Caribbean in general tends to be very hard because it's already stigmatized. We're just here like, hairy-fairy doing stuff. But the truth is it is a lot of mental energy, a lot of emotional energy just to like pour out what you're thinking and what you're feeling at that moment. There's a lot of research that gets put into these things. We don't just sit down and just do things, right? Because a lot of people think so, but we don't. And artists that come up with the work that you even see tonight from the artists, that came through research, not only with, the aid of Dr. Charles and Dr. Haynes, but also we had to look introspectively at, our own experiences. Lenore has her experiences, Anna will have her experiences, like relating to those journal entries and the data that was collected. We kind of just extrapolate and make something out of it. I hope that was clear enough.
Yeah, I think it's the same for me. Like, based on the information, I kind of find a point where I connect with it, and I move from there. So I try to put myself in these people's shoes, and any connecting points that emotionally I feel attached to, or moments, or descriptors that I felt like I experienced something similar, or I felt like I relate. That's kind of where I start the basis of a lot of my work, like where I find myself in it, and then it will blossom from there.
And for Lenore as well.
Sure. Can you guys hear me?
Unmute.
It's not me. Great. Similar to what Simone and Anna shared, you find a connecting point that touches close to heart, that you can start producing the work. For me, I'm a type 2 diabetic. I was diagnosed in Barbados about 7 years ago. So this became quite um, personal for me, this particular project. But one of the things that I did experience when moving back to the US with type 2 diabetes is community care. I have some great physicians. I have my own personal pharmacist and a dietitian that's been really helpful. And in reading the journals, I realized that a lot of women in Barbados didn't have that. It was something that was they were crying out about, this lack of familial and community support. And so for me, the piece that I wanted to create was both looking in the past in terms of our history of using herbal medicine to help heal ourselves, but also looking towards a community to help us get on the right path and feel supported and feel strong as we progress to try to keep ourselves healthy and sane.
Okay, thank you. And I direct this question now. We could stay with Lenore for now. Could you say a little bit more about your piece or any of the pieces that you submitted?
Sure, I submitted one piece, which is Tea and Empathy. My piece is about 4 feet tall and 2.5 feet wide. I am a collage artist. I'm a mixed media artist. Everything on that canvas, on that paper, I've cut out myself. I drew myself. I painted by hand. And for me, it's a very laborious process, but it's one that I enjoy. It's very meditative. And for this project, it was even more effective, And so for the piece, if you look at it, it's on the left-hand side, it's Cerasee, something that I'm very familiar with growing up in Barbados, to heal all sorts of things. But Cerasee is also in herbal medicine across the Caribbean used to lower blood sugar. On the right-hand side of the piece is Spanish needle, which has similar effects, seemingly on blood sugar. And of course, as mentioned earlier, the arm touching the figure. There's also the aspect of the self-hug in that piece, which is about holding yourself up as much as having the support of the community. So following the guidelines as best you can, taking care of yourself, forgiving yourself for eating those M&Ms in the car, but also just, being in a place of peace, in a place of beauty with yourself, in yourself, as well as outside. So that's where the piece came from. And also just wanting that for myself and having experienced that support and care from family and healthcare providers.
Thank you, Lenore. And I do believe we'll have an opportunity for closer inspection because the pieces are available in the foyer. I now turn the same question over to Simone.
So I did 2 pieces. One was titled Preservation and another Encumbered. I guess I'll talk about preservation first because I did that one first. And the first one sometimes is not always the favorite. But anyway, when I started this piece, I was looking at the journal entries and all of the data for both pieces. But when I was looking at this, I wanted to go more in a somewhat positive route, where I recognized that in some of the data, this idea of self-surveillance was a very heavy thing, where they had to check this blood sugar every day. They had to make sure that everything was okay in terms of lack of support. It was there, but some entries did talk about them being supported as well. So I kind of wanted to highlight the aspect of these women almost becoming revered, almost like saints. So I was looking at stained glass windows. I was looking at even the idea of them talking about they turn to faith kind of to guide themselves through this whole battle with the condition. So I wanted to kind of emphasize on that, but it also speaks about our lack of awareness as well. A lot of times we see people, even with these statistics that they have, there's so many people, women, battling with diabetes. My mother is diabetic as well, but sometimes you could look at my mother and you would think, nothing wrong with her, she's great. But I think that is something that I also wanted to highlight upon, because we see people, we don't really know what's going on with them, and that might just be the lack of information. You know, the fact that people were almost getting sabotaged by friends, like it's just a lack of information. So I wanted to kind of highlight the point of something looks okay from a distance, but when you go up close, you realize, oh, and when you analyze certain information or really get to know the person, you really understand that, okay, well, something might not be 100% here. So in my piece, this is not the one I'm talking about, but in my piece, from a distance, you will see it, you know, it's very pretty. I'm putting quotations on that word because the colors that I used, I wanted more alluring colors, kind of like candy colors. Like, they're very childlike and wonder. So when you go up close to it, you're like, okay, very, you know, visually appealing. But when you go closer, some of the plants, some of the textures on the clothing, the loose clothing, similar to the data, you will see almost that visceral type of textures. You will see the deterioration. You will see the scorch. You will see the bubbling of the on top of the plants. That's very, very similar or analogous to the things that the women were going through physically in their body. I also included the glucose molecule because I'm very interested in science. So I wanted to at least include that, and the red line, you will see it in both pieces, but the red line is just that constant bloodline, constant surveillance that they do over and over. Okay, I'm done with that one, so we can talk about encumbered. So with encumbered, which is going to come on at some point. Perfect. This one was the second one I did. I wanted to go a little bit more serious in terms of the history of Barbados and how it has impacted the data of diabetes as well. So I wanted to do something with sugarcane, since we are an island that literally was built and burdened on sugarcane. From slavery, post-abolition, we have been impacted by sugarcane. It's literally left a stain on our country. We had to depend on it economically, and look what it has done in terms of diabetes data. So it's kind of interesting to look at it from that perspective. So what I wanted to do was do maybe a figure within molasses, because, you know, we're the rum country as well. So I wanted to do something where it showed more of the mental struggle and physical struggle of women battling with diabetes. So in terms of the sugarcane almost warping around the figure, almost constricting her, well, not really, it's like kind of loose, but it's almost being held hostage. I wanted to show this surrendering to almost the disease, because you have it, you can kind of control it, but it's always gonna really just be there looming over you, almost, you know, as this like sinister kind of friend that you have. So I just wanted to, I don't know if I said that the best way, I had way more to say, but my head is really fuzzy because I'm nervous. But yes, that was only last thing I'll say. Yes, both figures are almost like submerged or half submerged within like foliage or liquid. But it's interesting that diabetes kind of affects the lower half of the body when it comes to women. So that's kind of unintentional, but a good thing for me to add on. Thank you.
Hi. So The first painting we want to start with is Head of the Table. So based on the diaries, I found it intriguing how a lot of women felt like they needed to hide their diagnosis from their family and immediate people, or they felt the need to adapt their own eating habits, which really and truly should be the most important thing. Seeing as you, it's the most important thing for you to eat appropriately. It was interesting how some women compromise because of their families and stuff like that in terms of how they choose to create food, or then compromise and did not eat or eat appropriately to them. So I was kind of inspired by that, and the idea of the woman being the head of the household came up because they're usually the ones in control of taking care of the house and whatnot, but yet there's this connotation that men are to sit at the head of the table when eating or dining. So I decided to place her at the head as like she taking control of her situation. And, the plates and stuff like that is absent of food. Well, there's tea, but it's absent of food for the most part. But it's like a complicated relationship between her and the table and the food and whatnot. And then another idea that came to me was using the kite as a symbolism. So I remember when we was young, we made a lot of kites with my family personally. We would make kites together, and it would be like grabbing the scraps and pieces of paper and whatnot that we found around. So to me, making the kite became a community aspect, and then also going out to fly the kite with everybody in kite season. It was like a whole community experience, and I felt like the kite could represent her and her navigating through diabetes and finding out what works and what doesn't work for her in terms of eating habits and all the different little things that they need to do and stay on top of. So this painting referenced that, and the kite, I use that as a symbolism as a symbolism to represent the community that I think is needed in order to support diabetes. And I feel like all of us should do the due diligence of having the information. And, in this piece, I kind of want to encourage us to find out for ourselves, especially if a family member decides to confide in you that they have diabetes. I think finding ways to help them without being overbearing, but being supportive and looking out for them is kind of necessary, because I found a lot of the women describe their experiences as being fairly lonely. So that's what this piece was looking at. Yeah, yeah, and the sky was like, yeah. The second painting, I also carried over the idea of the kite, but there was one person that mentioned, I think it was Deej, that mentioned that she felt like an unwanted guest in her own body. And that was kind of the whole key for this painting. The name of it is The Unwanted Guest. So, excuse me. So she was talking about how she felt uncomfortable in her skin, like some of the rashes and stuff like that she was experiencing. And the idea of feeling like I too big, or, the changes in the body. So for me, this painting, I was looking at the whole experience in terms of when I relate it to myself. Like, yes, when I fluctuate in size and whatnot, when I go to try on clothes and realizing, oh, that's not quite fitting me correctly, or, that kind of frustration, like you're taking off and putting back on and throwing things around. So I use that symbolism here. And both paintings have the sky in the background, because I didn't want it to be fully full of frustration. I still wanted to be a sense of peace, or something that you could reach further. So that's why I use the kite and whatnot, because it's something you're navigating and soaring, and like it's a community experience as well. And yeah, So that's good.
Thank you to each of our artists for, and I'm sure we'll get the chance to look at the pieces a little bit more because they're in the foyer, and we'll get to talk a little bit more with the artists as well. At this point, I'm going to open for questions from the audience. We'll take a round of questions. You just need to raise your hand, and a volunteer would come with a microphone. See your hand here?
Good night. Thank you, Dr. Charles and Dr. Haynes, for your presentation. It was very informative. I had a question about the study group criteria. What was the criteria in narrowing down the age group on the study, seeing the exclusion of age group below 30 in the study? So we didn't really hear much stories about people below the age of 30.
Hi, good night. Thanks for this lovely concept, and to Dr. Haynes and Dr. Charles. I heard sitting down and fascinated with the fact that both of you come up with this idea of linking art to diabetes. To me, it's like, like crossing the worlds, and listening to the young ladies speak to the whole question of the inspiration and where they got it. It reminded me of what one of our famous artists had said to me, It takes an academic to write a whole book, and then a song or a piece of art could speak to something in a very short way to tell a whole story. And I really enjoyed listening to your inspirations. That was the question to Dr. Haynes and Dr. Charles. My second question was, my second question gone from my head. Yeah. Well, I would like you to speak to the question of the sunflower, because it's very prominent in your thing, but you didn't speak to it when you were talking. And if the second question come back, I will come back to you. Okay, thanks.
So, thank you for these questions. Oh, I see one more, and this will be the last question. I'm sorry, last question.
Hi, good evening. I'm just wondering, this is for the researchers, how do you think Western cultures around food and what's not impacts research and advice for people with diabetes, particularly with stuff like seasoning and sugar and certain foods? Because, in the Caribbean, we have fruit cake, we have rum. These are things that are integral to our culture, but overseas, it's not a concern. And you kind of touched on it a bit during the discussion, but particularly at the beginning, there was this poster with the yes, maybe, no, and no stuff. And I'm just wondering, how do you think whiteness and Western culture influences what we define as good versus bad, and how that contradicts Caribbean and Black culture in general?
Thank you for these questions. I now turn it over to our panel.
I was going to do the age question. Okay. So thank you all for your questions. So the first question was about age, and so you just had to be an adult woman over 18 years or older with a type 2 diabetes diagnosis. And we did interview women in their 20s. The very last quotation that I read was from a 35-year-old woman, Marissa, who talked about her experience with type 2 diabetes and having an amputation. So there were women in their 20s who were interviewed, but there is a reason why the majority of the interviewees are older, and that has to do with the age at which they are diagnosed and the age at which type 2 diabetes manifests. But definitely, I don't have the numbers in my head, but we do have a table with that demographic information that says how many women in their 20s we interviewed, and also how long the interviewees were living with type 2 diabetes, including some people who were older but were only just recently diagnosed, and other people who had been living with type 2 diabetes for over 35 years. So the sample was that vast. That included women in their 20s all the way up to, I think the oldest participant was 76. Yes. So, and then Nicole is going to take the question about the Western diets and versus the Caribbean diets. I'm just going to say very quickly that the Caribbean is not outside of the West. And I'm not going to elaborate on that because I will hand over to Nicole, but the Caribbean is not somehow outside of what is the West.
Before I get to that, I just wanted to speak to the question on art and how we chose to link art and diabetes. And I think from the outset, when we conceptualized this project, Tanya and I were really clear that we wanted to have diverse forms of knowledge creation and mobilization or dissemination. And when we applied for the grant to do this project, it really emphasized interdisciplinary research, right? So we knew that we wanted to incorporate that. It was really important to us to have multiple perspectives, so the woman we interviewed, but also the artists. And I think when each of you three described your process, it was clear that it wasn't simply an interpretation of the data, but we also wanted these artists' experiences as Black Barbadian women who live within, among, or are from this context, and they can speak to these themes of shame and stigma, fear and worry that we elicited throughout the interviews. So it was really an iterative and collaborative process. We had meetings on Zoom where we talked about their concept proposals, where they shared with us their works in progress. Follow us to the queue tomorrow, queue in the community. We're going to be there with these artworks. We really wanted not just art, but we wanted to integrate community. We wanted to have our work in places where everyday Barbadians are, and not just academics, not just public health practitioners, not just doctors, physicians, some of the typical audiences you might think of when you think of a diabetes presentation or lecture. And then I just wanted to also plug and show my first book, Suspicion, that Simone Asia's art is on the cover of, just to show that, for me, it's always important that these theories are connected with artistic expression, because theory is lived experience. It's just a fancy term for lived experience. And so this book is about Black Barbadians' experiences with the human papillomavirus. And it was really important to me that when this book that was published in the United States was shown to the world, that it was represented with a Barbadian artist's work on the front. So I think that this is something that we just value as, it's a given, right, for us, that we want to have those two things working together.
So thanks for that question, Joy. And I wanted to say a little bit more about that question that you asked about what made us work with artists. So for me, anytime I am starting a project or interested in something, of course you have to read the peer-reviewed journals. I also want to find as much, like what have the visual artists done around this? What have the poets done? So I see Margaret Gill is in the audience, and one of the things that I did was I reached out to Margaret because I had remembered her performing a poem called Engines, and I think she photographed it and WhatsApped it to me, and that connected that history of gendered and sexual violence and trauma to sugarcane fields. So for me, part of the research is finding out like what have the Calypsonians said, or any other popular culture form, the poets, the artists, and all of that for me is doing the, what people say, like reading the literature. So for me, all of that is the background that I have to delve into to understand. So when we have, for example, the tenantry on the stage, is because we were trying to map as many Caribbean songs that either had a reference to diabetes or to sugar. And, I got so many recommendations from people. People give me lists from Haiti. This is how it appears in our music. So that was very much part of the process. And as Nicole said, it was from the beginning. This project was a long time coming. We applied for this funding about 3 times before we won. And always from the beginning, we knew that we wanted to work with visual artists as producers of knowledge, who communicate knowledge and who access and tap into things that we as researchers do not. And so for me, we're sitting here together as co-collaborators, co-conspirators, equals in this, exploring these experiences from the different skills that we have. And for me, there isn't one skill that is more valuable than the other. I think we need all of it. And I'm not sure if y'all missed it, but Nicole was saying that we're going to be at Q in the community tomorrow at Windward Cricket Club with the art. You can talk to us one-on-one about the research, and we're happy to talk to the public. The Barbados Diabetes Foundation would also be there, so you will have access to medical professionals and to screening and nutritional advice, and you'll also have a chance to hear from us working in women's studies to share more about that project. And I think maybe the artist. You want to do it? Okay. So you're going to respond to Joy? So Joy's question was how did medical professionals receive it? So I would say we had mixed responses. So even at the data collection, we had some persons who felt that our entire premise, that trying to locate this work historically, or even just thinking about diabetes in relation to sugar. So one of the things we were told was that diabetes had nothing to do with sugar. We had a question where we would ask medical professionals, how do you diagnose diabetes, right? Because when you are a social researcher, you ask the questions that might sound silly. And so for a lot of medical professionals, they're like, well, there's a standard way of diagnosing diabetes. But the reason we were asking is because there were women who, when we asked them, okay, so when were you diagnosed with diabetes? Sometimes it was, like several year period that they were reporting as a diagnosis that was taken like 5 years before they finally got it, or that they had been constantly going to the polyclinic with constantly high elevated blood sugar and never having been diagnosed with diabetes. Or I remember one woman who said the doctor told her, oh, take this white tablet for the sugar. And she said, well, when I was told to take this white tablet for the sugar, I had no idea that I had diabetes. And when we presented at the Oscar Jordan Memorial Lecture, there was a doctor in the audience who said, I have started interacting with my patients differently because I work at a clinic that is focused on treating diabetes. And I used to begin by asking people, okay, so how long have you been diagnosed with diabetes? And that there would be people there who had been referred by another doctor, but never having been told that they were referred because they had diabetes. So I would say part of the reception was that people like Dr. Diane Brathwaite at the Barbados Diabetes Foundation invited us to present to medical professionals. I think we were the first time that anybody certainly from like gender studies was presenting at a lecture that typically would only have other medical professionals speak. So she took a risk on us. But certainly there were many doctors we encountered who also shared our concerns about gaps in treatment and who were doing many innovative things to address those gaps and who had their own, so there's no singular medical establishment. You had other, conflicts in between there about how to manage care, about respect for different kinds of providers within the entire ecosystem and putting the patient first. So there wasn't any singular response, but there was, just as Dr. DeShong said in her opening remarks, a dismissal for thinking about these things in any historical context, and also sometimes if you're in gender studies, you expect already to have opposition towards your work, right? That is what it is. And so that has been part of it, but a lot of embracing and seeing and understanding the value of it has also been the response. So there's not been any single response from medical professionals. It has been very diverse, and we also couldn't have done the research that we did without medical professionals agreeing to be interviewed as part of it. I think it was for the artists.
Should I talk about the sunflower? I know Joy asked about the sunflower. I remember. The plants that I chose within that piece, preservation, had to do with me looking around in the yard, not the yard, but looking around in the backyard and looking at the plants that bees were most attracted to and hummingbirds were most attracted to. So you will find the plants that I did use were these bees literally look for plants that are more like enticing than others. It's quite interesting. It's just like how we choose particular foods that are super enticing, that are usually loaded with sugar. I'm a sugar head myself. But the thing is yes, sunflowers do represent hope as well, but also within those plants that I said earlier, they do have that sense of decay and rot within them as well. So it's just like a scam, basically. These very interesting, inviting plants, when you look closer, you realize, oh, something is kind of wrong with this. So yeah, that's it.
Okay, so thank you for your questions. And with that, I will close this portion of our presentation this evening. Thank you to everyone on our panel and to Lenore, who joins us from cyberspace. At this stage, I would like to invite or re-invite Dr. Charles, who will make a presentation to the Sidney Martin Library, whose representative I'm also inviting to join us on stage, Miss Annette Clark. Yes, and this is continuing the vein of researching and preserving important work. A sentiment I know that you appreciate having been established this evening. Thank you to Dr. Charles, and Miss Clark from the Sidney Martin Library. I will be sure to secure my copy outside, and I'm encouraging you to do so as well, to visit the booth that is hosted by the University Bookshop. I would like to invite Miss Patrice Daniel to the stage, please. Please welcome Miss Patrice Daniel.
Thank you so much for joining us, Patrice. So Patrice is a mental health clinician. She's also a gender and development specialist, and she served as the greatest research assistant ever with us on this project. We absolutely depended on Patrice's support with every phase from data collection to all the community engagements. She's going to be with us at Q in the community tomorrow. So we kept this off the program so that we could offer this as a surprise to Patrice and just to really express our appreciation or love. I feel like Patrice and I go way, way back. People always say that we look alike. This evening, somebody even asked me if Patrice was my daughter. I didn't get offended, even though I feel like I was only a few years above Patrice at school, but okay. But really, we love you, Patrice. Thank you so much.
So I am wearing my final hat for this evening, and that is to convey thanks to a host of people who have participated in bringing this event to its fruition. The Office of the Campus Registrar, thank you, to Campus Security, the Campus Lecture Series Fund, the Office of Marcoms, UWITV, and other members of the media. Special thank you to the University Bookshop. Please patronize the University Bookshop in the foyer. To the management and staff of the Errol Barrow Center for Creative Imagination, to Miss Patrice Daniel. I am so happy that you are recognized as well. Appreciating your work in bringing this project to a reality. I would like to also thank Ms. Alicia Haynes for her warm opening remarks, the staff and the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, the Nita Barrow Unit, Dr. Stefan Walcott, Ms. Sherry Asgill, Lanique's Catering, who I am sure is already set up outside for us, Ms. Onika Small, Ms. Norma Springer, Mr. Jamal Odwin of Azor Studios, and thank you, the audience in both realms, for being with us, for your engagement. And we are now at the end. I invite you to the reception in the foyer and, take a little bit of a closer look at the art pieces. The thing about art that I enjoy the most is there's always layers and there's always more than an initial glance can yield. Thank you to everybody. Have a pleasant evening.